The case today took place even earlier, in 1981. American photographer Carl McKen, because of an adventure experience that was not fully planned, alone and helpless in the wilderness of Alaska, finally ended in tragedy. However, unlike many adventurers' tragedies, he actually had several opportunities for rescue and survival, but he missed them one by one. In the end, only a 100-page record of his countdown to death and a thin, frozen corpse were left. So how did he gradually lose himself during the adventure? And how did he cut off his lifeline? In 1946, Carl McKen was born in Munich, Germany, because his father was in the U.S. Army. When he was very young, he moved to San Antonio, Texas, USA. In 1964, he graduated from high school. After dropping out of community college, he joined the U.S. Navy and served for 4 years. He was discharged from the military in 1969. Due to his love for nature photography and adventure, he moved to Alaska in the late 1970s. He was deeply attracted by the local magnificent glaciers, dense forests, and unique wild animals. Although Carl was not a professional photographer, he hoped to capture the beautiful scenery of Alaska through the lens and live a life of documenting wild animals. On ordinary days, Carl was cheerful, full of romantic fantasies about nature, and liked to share his adventure stories with friends. However, his adventure experience was limited, and he often didn't pay enough attention to detailed planning. This optimistic and careless character foreshadowed his tragedy. 1981. Carl planned to go on a photography adventure in the remote areas of Alaska. He chose a wilderness near the Brooks Range. It was far from human civilization and was rich in wild animals and magnificent natural scenery. March is also the season when everything grows. He rented a plane, and it took him to an unnamed lake. This lake was a full 240 kilometers away from the nearest city with People Fort, Yukon. In an era when mobile communication was very limited, it was quite a remarkable feat to leave civilization alone without any communication equipment. Here, Carl planned to start a 5-month jungle adventure and document the solitary lives of wild animals. For this trip, he brought 500 rolls of film, 640 kilograms of supplies, 2 rifles, and a shotgun. These things weighed almost a ton. After landing, he found that he had brought too many things, which was a great burden for moving the camp. So he discarded 5 boxes of bullets and a rifle, simply thinking that he wouldn't need them. But who knew that this would have a huge impact on his subsequent survival? The airplane leasing company that was responsible for dropping him off had asked Carl if he needed to be there to pick him up. Carl's answer at that time was that he didn't need to be picked up because he didn't have enough money to pay for the return trip. Moreover, he had already made an arrangement with a pilot friend to pick him up in August. But in fact, his pilot friend never knew when Carl went to the unnamed lake. Just like this, by mistake, Carl was effectively abandoned by himself in an area 240 kilometers away from human civilization. Although he had sufficient supplies with him, it was unknown when someone would find him. Although the few months' summer life allowed Carl to indeed capture many beautiful sceneries and wild animals, as he saw the food in his hands running out, he realized that August was approaching. The weather was gradually getting cooler, and Carl began to wait for his pilot friend to pick him up. But obviously, the pilot friend wouldn't come, because at the beginning, when chatting with his pilot friend, it was just a casual mention that the friend would work in Anchorage, Alaska in the summer. And Carl half-jokingly told him that he would also go on an adventure in a certain place in Alaska, and wanted him to pick him up by plane in August. But in fact, the two of them didn't clarify this matter at all. What's more, his plane couldn't reach the location specified by Carl. Just like this, Carl waited for a plane that could never arrive until mid-August. He realized that his pilot friend probably wouldn't come. By this time, his supplies were almost gone. and he could only hunt wild animals to satisfy his hunger. That's right, he needed the guns and bullets now. What he didn't expect was that when they were needed, these things had already been abandoned by himself dozens of kilometers away. Next, he could only use the remaining guns and bullets to hunt a limited number of prey. At first, he could still hunt ducks, rats, rabbits, or look for the carcasses of accidentally drowned reindeer in the lake to eat. But at some point, it started to rain continuously. Carl gradually began to regret it, because when he came here, he had sent 3 maps of his campsite and postcards to his father. But he didn't tell him the specific itinerary. His father didn't even know when Carl planned to return from the wilderness. Even on the postcard sent to his father, he said that if he didn't come back in the summer, his father shouldn't worry, because it meant that everything was going well, and he might come back at the end of the summer. These words were written by Carl himself to his father. Looking back now, they seem really naive. As the food and bullets decreased, he might not even be able to survive until the end of the summer. And at this time, no one in the whole world thought of going to rescue him. And the reason was already clear. Many times, he had personally cut off his own chances of survival. At the end of August, an Alaska state trooper was flying a plane for a routine inspection. When he flew over the unnamed lake, he saw Carl's camp. Carl, who was experiencing despair, also noticed the plane at this time. He excitedly waved his orange sleeping bag. However, this action made the police think that he was just saying hello. Then the plane flew by as if nothing had happened. Carl was devastated. When he saw this scene, he had finally waited for someone to show up, but they just left. He must have been even more desperate. He was sure that the pilot had seen him. But if he missed this chance, he might die here. Fortunately, not long after, the sound of propellers came from the sky again. It turned out that the plane had flown back. Carl thought the plane was coming to pick him up, but to his surprise, the plane just circled around and didn't land. At this time, Carl raised his right hand as high as he could and waved his fist, like a celebratory gesture after scoring. But the plane still flew away. Let me explain here. In fact, the police did see Carl's distress signals. But why didn't he stop the second time? Please look closely at this chart. This is a body signal chart from the U.S. Army Field Manual Survival Guide. These postures can be used to convey information through body movements when the plane is close enough and the pilot can see you. Among them, waving both hands means do not land here, and raising both hands above the head means the plane coming to pick me up has been abandoned. You can learn about it appropriately. Of course, this should only be applicable in the United States, and it's a chart from the last century. According to the chart, the action Carl made when he saw the plane the second time happened to be the one on this chart. That means everything is okay. Do not wait. Wasn't this just cutting off his own lifeline? Afterwards, the police officer also revealed that he did see Carl's actions, and he made a third pass over the camp. But this time, he saw Carl walking back to the tent as if nothing was wrong, as if he didn't need help at all. In fact, looking at it now from an omniscient perspective, it seems that Carl missed a series of opportunities for help. From self-rescue to asking for help. It's as if fate didn't want him to leave there alive. Surely some friends will ask, what if the police officer was lying? That he didn't see Carl at all, or saw him but deliberately didn't rescue him? Then it shouldn't be Carl's problem. But in fact, Carl realized at that time that he had made the wrong gesture. He even wrote it in his diary, and was very self-reproachful, and the police did see it. So they made a third fly by observation. But the first time Carl waved the sleeping bag as a greeting. The second time his gesture meant everything was okay. And the third time he saw Carl walking back to the tent made the police very certain of their speculation. After missing this chance, Alaska really entered autumn and winter. The temperature became even colder, and everything was getting ready for winter, until it started to snow, and the lake froze, and the number of prey became fewer and fewer. In the end, the traps used to catch rabbits were often destroyed by wolves and foxes. By November, Carl had completely run out of food. In fact, he had considered walking to the nearest city. At that time, his location was 121 kilometers away from Fort Yukon. Judging from the initial landing point, he had only traveled half the distance in these months. But that was at the beginning. Carl had sufficient supplies and a healthy physical condition. The weather was also very comfortable. But now he had no food, nor did he have extra bullets for hunting. The weather was getting worse and worse. His physical and mental state had also reached a very weak level. On Thanksgiving Day, November 26th, he wrote in his diary that he often felt dizzy and constantly cold. Not long after, Carl decided to end his life. He used the last of his fuel to light a bonfire and wrote a letter. The letter said that if anyone found his body, please give his personal effects to his father. And then, as a token of appreciation, he could be given one of the remaining rifles and shotguns. Then he also instructed his father on how to develop photos. Subsequently, Carl pinned his driver's license to this letter and committed suicide with the rifle. Time flew by to January. It was then that Carl's friends realized that he had been missing for such a long time and wondered if something had happened to him. So they called the police and asked them to search for his whereabouts. Since January is the time when the weather in Alaska is the worst, it was not until January 26th, when the weather improved a bit, that a police officer flying over Carl's camp discovered his tent. The temperature at that time was minus 43 degrees Celsius. On February 2nd, 1982, a plane carrying several rescue workers landed next to the camp. They cut open the frozen tent and found Carl's thin and frozen corpse. Beside him was a diary with as many as 100 pages. The last entry in the diary read, "Am lighting my last emergency lamp. I just added the last chopped firewood to the fire. When the ashes cool down, I'll cool down with them. I've been afraid once, but I don't want to experience that kind of cold again. They say it doesn't hurt. If my body is eaten or if I commit suicide, please place me under a tree. That way, at least I can provide a decent meal for some small animals. I don't want my family to see me like this. They've already suffered enough harm. If I insanely try to go out in this state again, but can't find anywhere, please carry out the above wishes. I sincerely thank anyone who can do this." So, after reading the whole story, what do you all think? Personally, I think that since he managed to keep his film until his death and kept updating his diary, he was a person who truly loved nature and dared to take risks. He was willing to leave the comfort zone of modern society and plunge into the wilderness of Alaska. Such courage and passion were very rare, especially in that era. However, his shortcomings were also very obvious. He had a serious lack of planning. He didn't have a clear schedule for his return and didn't inform others of the specific details for picking him up. This negligence revealed his underestimation of nature and survival challenges. In particular, he was ill-prepared for the extremely harsh conditions of Alaskan winters. What's more, as an adventurer, he didn't learn the necessary wilderness survival skills, such as how to effectively hunt for food or build a long-term shelter. When facing problems, he did try some self-rescue measures, but due to a lack of professional knowledge, his efforts were in vain. After realizing that no one would come to rescue him, he gradually fell into despair and chose to end his own life, which made this adventure even more tragic. So, if you want to go on an adventure alone in the uninhabited area, you will surely be in conflict with nature. But you should be clear that enthusiasm and a spirit of adventure alone are far from enough. Scientific planning, sufficient resources, and necessary survival skills are the safest guarantees. Carl's tragedy is not just a simple failure, but a profound warning about the relationship between humans and nature.